It takes many expert voices to keep up with the ever evolving world of fire safety. And today we're hearing from a group dedicated to making sure every voice is heard. Women Talking Fire. That's today on the Code Authority. Hey everyone, I'm Phil Doherty, Managing Editor, UL Solutions, and your host here on the Code Authority. Joining us today, Kremena Angelova. Currently, she is a senior associate at WJE Associates. She's done a lot of work in fire engineering assessment, damage investigation, and structural evaluation, as well as evaluating the fire performance of cladding materials and systems. She is also, of course, a member of Women Talking Fire. And Tess Espejo of UL Solutions in Canada. She is our program manager for codes and regulatory services. Tess has a very long history here in safety science expertise in fire protection systems, life safety systems, and a lot more. So thank you both very much for joining the Code Authority today.
Thank you, Phil. Glad to be here.
Women Talking Fire, that's an independent women's networking group for the UK fire safety industry. Kremena, please tell us a little bit about this organization.
Thank you. Our organization was founded in 2023 by Andrea White. She was reflecting on her career and how she did not have very many female mentors or peers. And she decided that she would like to build an organization where these women can network and meet each other and exchange ideas.
Okay, and what are some of the accomplishments of this group so far?
We have more than 3,000 followers now on LinkedIn. And we also are present in major expos like London Build, also the fire safety event in Birmingham. We also have our own technical conference, which is happening in June.
Okay, we're going to hear more about that in just a little bit. But before we get to that, what is your role in the organization Women Talking Fire?
I'm part of the committee. I'm helping with building the budget for our organization, as well as like outreach to organizations, just like with UL Solution.
Okay, and how has it influenced your career so far? What have you gained from this?
Well, it has been a great opportunity again to have more traction on LinkedIn and also to meet people and again be invited to events like that, also like to conferences. And it's just a good way to again connect with other women.
Okay, thank you. Women make up 10 to 15% of the technical professionals in this industry. Now, that's going to vary a little bit from country to country and depending on exactly which study you're looking at, but 10 to 15% is a pretty good across the board number. So, how is the experience of working in this industry different for women? Tess, you first.
Thank you very much for that question, Phil. The actual outputs of women versus the men in this industry is the same. The difference, I think, is in the way that women work. Just because we have a different physique, we have a different way of working, and sometimes we have different challenges. So the challenge for women is that most of the policies, procedures, and tools that are available for us in the industry are made by men, and more often than not, they're also made for men. So the way that the PPEs or the gear that women wear in firefighting, for instance, was made for men by men. So it's sometimes ill-fitting for women firefighters, and it is very difficult for them in their movement in when they are extinguishing fire, but also the tools, right? The ladders that are sometimes difficult for women to use, the tools and the heaviness of them are sometimes challenging for women. I find that what is encouraging is that, and I see this trend in recent years, is that more and more female engineers are going into design and project management. And I find that, and we were talking about this just recently, because women tend to be more detail-oriented, they tend to be more prone or have the tendency to multitask and are able to do that well. So we are often more efficient in project management and in designing and in documenting and in teaching. So hopefully those will continue as well. But I guess there are just differences because of the way we work and because of our physique.
All right, thanks, Tess. You mentioned a lot of very good specific examples there of exactly how women have a different experience in some aspects than men do. How does that different experience interact with Women Talking Fire? Like, what does Women Talking Fire do with knowledge of that experience?
Excellent question, because I often ask myself, how did we get here? Just like what Cremena has said and what Andrea White has experienced as a founder of Women Talking Fire, there is a tendency for the industry to minimize the voice of women. Sometimes there is an inherent bias, and I don't mean to generalize that it is true everywhere, but generally speaking, there is a bias against the voice of women, thinking that women are less technical or have less to say or have less expertise. So women need to sometimes encourage one another and just provide a platform so that we can amplify those voices. And I just spoke a little while ago about policies and procedures. We need to streamline women's issues in the development of those policies and procedures. And we just need to think about the challenges that women face when we are addressing a certain issue or when we are trying to solve a certain problem. So women just need to be heard, just to be listened to, and just need to participate in those fora and in those discussion when we're talking about the industry.
Okay. You bring up a very interesting point there, some inherent bias that can be there. Have you personally experienced that?
Absolutely. I think just because of my decades of experience in this industry, there is no question that this is a male-dominated world. Just because of the nature of the job that we are facing, fire protection and fire safety can sometimes be very physical. So I understand that there are more male of the species that would be attracted to this trade, but also because of that tendency and because it has always been like that, it has become sort of an accepted norm that men's voices will be louder and more amplified. And then there's also inadequate training for women in the way we uniquely do things. Because, as I mentioned before, there are just some ways that women are doing differently because of the nature of our body and because of the challenges that we face. We cannot carry a 50-pound bag, so that is difficult for us. And also, I think there is a lack of mentorship among women. So less women from the younger generation, especially those from university or those who are seeking a career. There is a lack of models in the industry for women, lack of visibility. So younger women think that this is not a career for them because they don't see a lot of women practicing in the industry. So I think that is why Women Talking Fire, and here in Canada, we're also doing the same thing. There is a need for us to encourage women to be in this space, to say that there is a space for you here and your voices are welcome and your expertise are going to be encouraged.
Yes, we are definitely amplifying some of those voices right now, right here.
Exactly.
Cremena, same question for you. Have you encountered any of the bias that Tess has just discussed in your career here? And if so, what was that like?
Thank you for that question. Yes, I have faced definitely similar issues, like especially going on site with contractors where you'll bring like a younger like intern even on site with you, and the contractor tend to like turn to the male in the group to like ask questions, technical questions, assuming that I'm more junior and there just take notes. On the other hand, I have also experienced where different managers that I have worked with, I will bring like someone very senior to just attend the site and see kind of the work we do from our company. And this manager just talked to me, like discuss all the issues with me, and like was focused on kind of like respecting me as a project manager. And like, of course, greeted the guests, but was directing all the questions to me. So things like that, are small or big, are definitely a problem. And another thing I think to add to what Tess was saying is just our nature as women. I have read one book, it was called Lean In, that talks about how women are usually like not leaning in. They're always kind of reserved and like stepping back and like waiting and be quiet and like kind of saying more like away from, let's say, what is discussed on the table. And I had similar experience in previous design firm. We had presentations where it was like a table where kind of more senior staff would sit, and it was never women there. Like everybody was allowed to sit there, but women were just not having the courage to go and sit at the table. And that's another book that's also interesting. Again, kind of like pushing women further. And I would have been very lucky to have mentors in my career that have always pushed me to overcome this kind of like hesitance and like anxiety to like, sit at the table and be heard.
So, have you encountered some mentors like that through Women Talking Fire? People sharing similar stories?
Well, again, our conversation with Tess the last couple of weeks have been very, again, pleasant. And with my career, I just joined Women Talking Fire recently. But again, in my career, I have been lucky to have a great support around me to, again, help me deal with this kind of hesitance or like, again, our nature to always doubt ourselves.
That is a fascinating perspective. One more follow up on that one. Have you been in a situation where maybe there were like only men sitting there at the table, and there was nothing saying that women couldn't sit there, but you didn't
Yeah,
necessarily have
exactly.
hey, I'm going to go up there and sit down. Has any conversations with mentors like Tess or other people through Women Talking Fire, has that given you the perspective to say, you know what, I can sit here or do something else?
Exactly. This was at that previous firm. We were like reflecting on how like there were no women there. And again, they like we start pulling chairs and like sitting right by the director of the office, for example. And
And
like
did
just
you
having
encounter
this
opposition on that? Did someone say like, "What are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here," or was it just
no.
okay?
It was well received again. Like I think that the world has changed and it's a lot more receptive. Like our office is mostly female here in London. Um, but still there's more to be done.
Mm.
Okay, well, that is fascinating. Next one, slightly broader question: how is Women Talking Fire interacting with UL Solutions broadly? I know, like, the organization is still not all that old yet, but you're doing big things. So, what is the organization currently doing with UL Solutions, and then what kind of plans do you have for the future? That question is for Tess.
Thank you for that question, Phil. So I started connecting with Women Talking Fire late last year. I had a conversation with Andrea White, who is their founder, and that just opened my eyes to the possibility of, again, advocating women's voice for women's voices and amplifying that. So that connection is now just being developed. We have had a lot of interaction. I've met with Cremina and some of their other leadership. And what we are planning is to deepen that relationship this year. In fact, on the technical conference that Cremina is talking about, UL Solutions is going to be visible there. We're going to attend, we're going to have a booth, we're going to talk to them about what UL Solutions is doing. But not only that, representing the strength of women in our organization. I'm going not to bring not just women, but also male allies who are supporting our initiative. So that connection between Women Talking Fire and UL Solutions is just a perfect initiative in that we resonate with each other's goals and missions, and at the same time, supporting each other's efforts and initiatives to promote, advocate, and amplify women.
Okay, question for you. We both work at UL Solutions. I'm a male colleague. What could I do or other guys like me do to behave as an ally?
Great question. And just like what Crimina said, I think there has been a lot of positive development lately in that more and more women and male allies are recognizing the what used to be systemic and inherent bias is now being deconstructed. So, Phil, if you want to support women, is just be intentional in again encouraging women to not act in a secondary role, encouraging them to be at the table instead of outside the table looking in, and to just be courageous in saying something like this, like exactly what we're doing now. We should do this more often and have women talk about actual technical issues that they are um, doing in their work and what they're doing in the industry. I think that's a perfect start. And then that will just become a practice and a habit later on for more men.
What are some of the job benefits that women tend to look for more than men? Cremena?
That's definitely would be probably flexibility on the work schedule and also like benefits for childcare. I was talking to one of my coworkers who has like a 6-month-old baby. They were saying that the daycare cost is more than their mortgage. So definitely work in that direction that women can have more help with childcare or financial or otherwise, like grandparents or a support group around them was very beneficial because I know, like, from my colleague that his wife really wants to go back to the workforce and she's a chemical engineer, but it's just unaffordable to pay another mortgage for a daycare. So you can go to work.
And if I may, Phil, because when we were just talking about inherent bias, and I'm not saying this is still that this is intentional, but it's still there. Although things are improving recently, the primary responsibility for taking care of the family rests on women. And although more men are just now becoming more responsible and sharing that responsibility, it still falls on women generally to worry about this. So if we are talking about giving voices to women and giving them a seat at the table, we have to understand the challenges that a woman faces when she goes into the workplace, because she's not just worrying about her career and about the work that is in front of her. She's also worrying about her family at home that she's left behind. So those need to be thought about, need to be resolved when we are, again, talking about policies and procedures and tools for women in the industry.
And Women Talking Fire is definitely helping do just that, amplifying those concerns. Okay, thank you for that. We're going to start talking about some career accomplishments now, and not just for yourselves, but for other women who might be listening. Cremena, let's start with you. What is your proudest career accomplishment so far, and why?
That's a tough question. I think that I'm proud of how I was able to, again, first coming in from Bulgaria, integrated in the U.S. educational system. I took on taking bachelor's and master's in IIT. Then I started working in the U.S. in Chicago, and then opportunity presented itself, and I was able to transfer here to London, and I had to learn new codes and new culture and new clients and new way of construction, and it has been fun throughout the path.
And all of that not in your native language either.
Yeah, that too.
Whole other layer of complexity there. Tess, what about you? What's your proudest career accomplishment, or one of them? You don't necessarily have to pick the number one, but top three.
Thank you for that wonderful question, Phil, because my journey as a fire protection practitioner now is very different from Cremena. I'm not an engineer, so I have less technical background. I did not study it in school. I actually studied economics and a master's in public administration. I started as a project manager, developing and managing technical committees, developing standards for tanks and fittings for flammable combustible liquids first, and then fire protection, fire alarm and life safety, security and burglar alarm. But at the same time, I also worked to have those standards that I helped develop be referenced in codes. So I think when you're talking about accomplishments, that is what I'm very proud of, is my work with code development as well as standards development and having those married together. The second career accomplishment that I am proud of is when we developed at UL Solutions those cannabis standards and regulations when the recreational cannabis was first legalized here in Canada. And we did standards and or international work agreements and regulations at a very fast pace just to address those issues that the industry was facing, and they didn't know what to do because all of a sudden this new law it is there and available, and many new warehouses were being renovated and re-engineered to have oil processing for cannabis. So that's the second one, and I think the third one is when UL Solutions developed certification programs based on, again, on the standards that I developed. One of the more important things that I'm very proud of is integrated systems testing of fire protection and life safety systems. And I developed that standard, and then I also helped develop the certification program at UL Solutions. And now I'm helping authorities having jurisdictions, code authorities, and regulators implement that law now, and have the industry learn about that, the standard, the code, and the regulations. So I'm helping in all those areas. And just having that full circle is a very proud achievement for me.
All right. Thank you very much, Tess. We also have some pictures of what this kind of work can actually look like out in the field. Carmena, we have a picture of you walking in what, well, it looks like a building that's just been destroyed, and this is simply part of your job. So this is a day in the life. So could you tell us a little bit about what are you doing here? And then how did you discover that you like doing this?
This is an office building in Sheffield where we were brought in by the principal contractor that was working on the refurbishment of the space to evaluate the structural fire performance of the existing structure as well as the fire stopping. So then we had to, after doing the survey and understanding the existing conditions, we had to develop a solution for repairs. And why I like working in the field is because I previously had an experience in a design firm where I was basically bound to my desk whole week, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. And then anytime we had the opportunity to go on site, I was super excited to look at what we're actually designing. So with that experience or lack of site experience, I decided that design work is not for me. So I looked into consultancy where I could do get my hands dirty, literally. This is actually a project where we were evaluating the damage to a structural framing at a graphite purifying plant where they heat graphite to very high temperature, 200 degrees Celsius, and malfunction happened and exploded, basically. And it melted the steel framing above at the roof level. So we had to get up close and kind of clean up the connections. And yeah, this is after a day of working on in that manufacturing plant, and all of the soot was on our face and hands.
So if you want to spend all of your day in Excel and Microsoft projects or products, this is probably not necessarily the exact line of work you want to get into. That's good.
Yeah, precisely.
Okay, outside the industry, people really don't hear that much about fire inspection and fire safety science. It's not necessarily the most mainstream of topics that people are going to be discussing, not really, therefore, on many people's radar screens for a career. So, Carmena, how did you first figure out that, hey, I really want to go do this?
So it started all with my Homeland Security class at IAT, where a professor that we had, Professor Longinov, was teaching a class with focus on fire engineering, which was really interesting to me. He brought a lot of speakers from the industry that shared their on-site experience and testing that they have done. So from there, I was lucky to have project work in my current firm, WG, where I was able to use my knowledge from this class. And from there, it has been almost 7 years where my main focus has been fire engineering.
For all of the young women who might be watching or listening to this, what kind of jobs in fire protection right now are available to young women who are planning their careers? The first part. And then what will you say to such young women who are in school right now and trying to figure out their career aspirations? Tess, first you.
At UL Solutions, we can start off with people who are here either testing products and materials for fire protection and life safety, or doing engineering work like examining actual systems and evaluating those products. In the government, we can see that there are people who are reviewing plans and then inspecting construction sites just to make sure that they are code compliant. We also have a lot of fire inspectors who are making sure that the buildings and facilities continue to be compliant for fire protection and life safety with the code requirements on that. And also those who are investigating fire events, especially those with injuries, causing injuries and or fatalities. We can also see a lot of need in the area of education and training, and just communicating what we need in the fire protection and life safety industry. So those are just some of the areas where we need fire practitioners. And of course, how can I forget fire technicians who are installing or repairing or fixing fire systems. And I mentioned sprinkler, fire alarm systems, smoke control systems. Those are direly needed as well.
Okay, Carmena, let's say you're giving a lecture to a group of young college students. What would you say to them to persuade them, or at least let them know that there are all these great career opportunities in fire protection and fire safety? What do you have to say to them?
Oh, it's a lot of fun, especially like fire testing. I have a couple of projects coming up that will be actually testing a facade system, like a full scale test. So that's the most rewarding, like being able to like design something and then go to the lab and test it and see how it fails, learn from that, and then apply it to the next project.
And may I say as well, Phil, sorry, to add to what Carmena is saying, this is, I think, one of the few areas of work where you're actually paid to explode and destroy things. Because especially in fire testing, that's what we do. We try to destroy a thing in order to determine whether they are safe or not.
You got to check out all the videos that we have on our YouTube page. Everyone who's watching and listening, we have a lot of great testing footage there. We have ballistic testing, fire testing, everything that we just heard about here, plus all kinds of other stuff as well. It's fascinating to see everything that goes into making sure your everyday products function the way they're supposed to and that you don't have to worry about them. So, yeah. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I would definitely have to agree with that. Like, not that I actually do that kind of work, but I see other people here do that all the time. And it does look like a lot of fun. You get to play with a lot of fire.
Yeah.
Okay, we
Yes.
mentioned this last one earlier here, but I just want to nail down the details. There is that technical conference coming up later on this year in Winchester. Carmena, could you give us a little more information about that? How can people get involved and what can they expect to see and hear if they do attend?
Sure. We will start our technical conference with a dinner on June 18th. Then the next day we'll have a full day of conference with guest speakers and a keynote speakers that will be soon revealed. And people can already purchase tickets on our website, is womentalkingfire.com. There's under the event tab, they can select the event and purchase tickets.
All right. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us here today on the Code Authority. We really do appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you very much for joining us as well. If you want to learn more about Women Talking Fire, please check out womentalkingfire.com. Once again, that's womentalkingfire.com. You can learn more about this great community and more about how to get involved. And that's it for this episode of the Code Authority. Thank you very much for joining us. We have a lot more great insights on safety in the built environment and safety science in general. Just check out our website. That's ul.com/the Code Authority. Once again, our website, ul.com/the Code Authority. There was also a whole newsletter and a whole community of inspectors, scientists, engineers, innovators, and people who are just curious about this and want to learn more. Oh, and there's also more episodes too, so be sure to check that out. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Spotify. That's it for now. Thanks a lot for joining us. We'll see you back here again later. This is the Code Authority.